Good morning, everyone. My name is Orko Mitra, and I, on behalf of CII Suresh Neotia Center of Excellence of Leadership, welcome all of you once again to the Leadership webinar series on leveraging the power of HR analytics. Today's topic is on how talent analytics can improve the quality of hire. The need for organizations to have top talent is absolutely critical. So the employment market for top performers is also fiercely competitive. One needs to hire the right employees and one needs to hire them very quickly. This can be a very tricky combination, and under the pressure to act quickly, it is often seen that organizations sacrifice the quality of their hires. With an increasing pressure on HR professionals today to monitor the business impact of their activities, measuring and improving their quality of hire becomes a critical first step towards achieving this goal. In today's data-driven business world, the incentive to address any need boils down to its subsequent business impact. An effort which becomes futile if HR professionals don't have access to the right set of data to draw insights and take subsequent action. Talent analytics can help you address your quality hire issues with advanced statistical modeling that lets you see the correlations hiding in your data. This webinar will share experiences of how organizations can improve its quality of hire using data analytics and show a measurable impact on business KPIs. The speaker for this edition of the webinar is Mr. Shailesh Singh, and he's the Vice President and Head of Recruitment Business at PeopleStrong. He's responsible for driving the overall business growth and bottom line and defining the strategic direction of the recruitment business. In this role, Shailesh has been at the forefront of various recruitment and HR transformation projects for leading multinational organizations and conglomerates. He's very passionate about enabling HR to drive business productivity and has moved away from playing transactional and administrative roles. He has been part of the company for over 5 years now and has held key positions, the most prominent one being that of the recruitment scientist. He's played a pivotal role in making PeopleStrong one of the largest recruitment process outsourcing organizations in India. Shailesh has been an integral part of the transformation journeys of clients across sectors, especially in automotive, manufacturing, IT, and ITES. I would want to mention here that the design of today's session encourages a lot of interaction. So please keep on posting your questions in the questions panel. We'll take all the questions at the end of the session. Over to you, Shailesh.
Thank you, Arko. Very good morning, everyone. This is Shailesh. Personally, it's a very exciting session for me. Serving close to 27 customers, hiring about 50,000 people for them every year has made us come to a conclusion that at the end of it, analytics is really the outcome that customers seek. And today we'd try and share some of our experiences of how we've created value by bringing out some of those insights, foresights for the customers that we've served, how we've leveraged various analytics tools, various technologies to deliver that outcome to our customers. So let me, without any delays, move to the very first slide. And I'd like you all to probably go through this and ponder for a couple of minutes. And I hope this is something that we do come across in our work life, in our personal lives, where numbers and data are used to derive conclusions, outcomes, and not all of those conclusions and outcomes seem to head where we'd like them to, seem to be meaningful or seem to give us any sort of decision-making ability. If that's something that you also experience at your workplace or in your personal lives, there's probably a reason for that. And the reason is that there's a lot of myth around what we'd like to call analytics. A lot of times it is believed that analytics is about numbers. A lot of times it is believed that analytics is about data. Invariably, we even confuse ourselves by believing that data is only numerical. These are some of the myths that lead to all confusion that prevails around analysis, conclusions, decision making. So my intent, as far as this slide is concerned, is to address some of those myths. So let's try and understand whether analytics and data are the same, are they different? If they're different, how do they correlate to each other? So let's understand what's analysis first. Analysis is defined as discovery, interpretation, and communication of meaningful patterns. Now, this does not necessarily require you to have data. If we all reflect on our daily lives, we'd figure out that whether there's data or not, we are analyzing at all times. We are using our senses to observe, accumulate, and draw meaningful conclusions out of that. That is analysis. When you talk of data, data itself is not analysis. Data is defined as a set of values of qualitative or quantitative variables. Please be mindful, data is not only quantitative. Qualitative inputs also refer to data. Now, when we blend both of these, when we bring qualitative and quantitative variables from all across ourselves and use them to derive meaningful patterns, interpret, discover something, and then take a decision based on that, because no discovery interpretation is good enough unless there's an action that follows. So this entire cycle of gathering qualitative and quantitative variables, finding enough meaning in those, and then communicating those in terms of outcomes and actions is what analytics really is. When we do that, it builds insight, and insight enables us to do decision making. That is the process of analytics. None of it is just data alone. A lot of times we confuse data to be analytics. Let's look at an example. I'm sure you're familiar with, or most of you would by now be familiar with, a brand called Decathlon. It's a sports store. You walk in there and get a variety of sports equipment at very efficient prices. If you've ever been there shopping, you would have seen that post the billing is done. At the billing counter, they ask you to give a simple feedback to capture your experience, where they ask you to click one of the 3 emoticons. Now, a lot of organizations, a lot of individuals may say that the fact that Decathlon is able to gather the experience of buyers, of customers, that's a lot of analytics that they have. Whereas the fact is, this really is data gathering. You've only gathered inputs to say how many people were really happy, how many people felt neutral, and how many people were not happy with their shopping experience at the shop. That is only data. We've not even gotten to analysis. But what they also do very beautifully is that they blend this feedback data with the invoice details. So they look at the kind of items that have been purchased. They look at the price point of those items. and they blend all of that together to derive correlations between the feedback and the purchases that have been made. Once that correlation is done is when analytics happens. And the outcome of that analytical exercise is the insight that we referred to. That insight could be anything like what is it that they need to improve in their range of products? What is it that they need to do with their price points? Was there a higher wait time because of which the experience was what it was? Were there issues with responsiveness from the staff? These are some of the decisions that they're able to work on because they have correlated data together to find meaningful patterns. That's analyzing, and that's leading to insight. So hope I've sort of clarified that data by itself, building reports, churning out numbers, is not analytics. Analyzing independently without data, that's perception. That's not analysis either. It is when we blend both to derive insights and get meaningful decisions out of those insights is when analytics really happens. Let's look at another myth, since we, or most of us, are from HR background, and the session today is on talent analytics. Let's understand that even if we could figure out the definition of analytics well, like we understood on the last slide, could we still go wrong? And the answer is yes. A lot of organizations go wrong because they limit themselves to HR analytics. At the best, organizations go to the extent of talent analytics. But if you're referring to HR, if you're referring to talent, you're actually referring to people. HR is only a very small subset of managing people. Talent's a very small subset of an individual. An individual is much more complex. An individual is much more than just their role, than just their job, than just the goals that they're expected to deliver on. And hence, no talent analytics could be complete without getting to the depth of the individual or people and really analyzing people as a whole. So what's the challenge with HR analytics? One, it is very narrow. Second, HR analytics mostly is an inside-out view of what you're wanting to do with your function. And it's really a measure of data, not really analytics. An example of that is number of CVs per position. A lot of talent acquisition teams, a lot of recruiters, recruitment managers tend to use this metric and say, it's really an analysis of my supply strength or my sourcing strength. Well, it isn't any analytics at all. It's just a simple data point to say how many CVs are available for each position. It's not even going outside of the function to bring any insight. It's simply referring to a number which is a very inside view of what's happening in TA inside that organization. Even if somebody could scale it up to a talent analytics level, yes, it does get a little broader. When you refer to talent analytics, you do bring in the outside-in view. But the analysis is still limited because let's take an example of that. A lot of good TA teams do talent mapping, where they're not really referring only to the number of CVs that are available for a position that they're wanting to close. They're actually bringing in a lot of outside information to say, what's the kind of talent pool that exists for this role? Now, while I say that that in itself is limited analysis, I also want to compliment anybody who gets to this stage, because not a lot of organizations, not a lot of TA teams are able to get to even that stage of being able to bring that outside view of what's the talent pipeline looking like, or what's the talent map looking like. But even with that, it doesn't offer you a full analysis because it only tells you another data point and suggests that besides what you have within, what's the kind of number, what's the kind of profile that exists beyond. But it still doesn't solve the fundamental ask from a recruitment function, which is to find that one best person for the job. It is still a lot of data, but still not the outcome, still not the decision. But when we further broaden that and take it to a people analytics level, that's when it becomes all encompassing. That's when you get holistic view of talent, which is not just about numbers, which is not just to say that we have 100 people, I have 5 CVs with me, there are another 100 outside for this job working with XYZ organizations. It is not limited to that. You go beyond that and say that out of those 100, here are the 2 which have the right profile or have the right positive or have the positive profiling to be able to meet the expectations of the job I'm hiring for. But to be able to do that, you have to run analytics and gather data at that individual level. And when you're analyzing or building a decision on that individual, get data gathering and analysis. You have to assess that human being. You have to assess that person. When you're able to do that and create meaning out of that, it becomes people analytics. So from here on in this session, we will not talk of talent or we will not talk of HR analytics. We'll talk of people analytics because that's when your analytics will take you to insights and decisions. Let's look at an example. This is a real life example of one of our customers in the BFSI space. They were struggling for a very long time to improve productivity and stability of their sales executives. Their attrition was as high as, or early attrition, if I may put it that way, was as high as 61%. That's losing 61% of the hires in the very first 90 days. And the productivity targets were not being met. We picked up this project. We said, let's not look at hires. Let's look at the existing employees who are doing well or who've been very stable in the system, whose tenures have been higher than others. So we gathered data for all such employees at the organization and then identified these 18 parameters which had some sort of correlation with their performance and stability scores. We ran several sorts of analysis. We looked at regression, we looked at Pareto's and several other tools. And as we went deeper with the correlation of their performance and stability data with these 18 parameters, we realized that these 8 out of the 18 have very strong correlation with how they perform or how stable they are at that organization. I'd like you to observe some of these. These are not data sets which typically revolve around talent or work life. For instance, somebody's favorite hobby. the kind of vehicle that they own. These are not the kind of data sets that you would usually blend with or use for deriving talent analytics. But it was important because when a sales guy performs, it is him as a person, him or her as a person, him or her as an individual that's going out in the market and selling. So how could we leave out a part of him which may not be related to work, but plays a role when he makes that sale? So the correlation exercise was completed. We figured out that people within a certain age bucket have been performing better or have been more stable. Those who owned a two-wheeler vis-a-vis not owning a vehicle at all or owning a four-wheeler performed better. Those with hobbies which were more extrovert in nature did better than the ones who had hobbies which were more inward or in-house hobbies. Those who had spent higher time staying at the location where they were supposed to work did better at their productivity numbers than others who had stayed for only a couple of years at that location. All of this once was seen as strongly correlated, was made as critical to quality parameters for hiring of these profiles. About a year and a half, we ensured that every candidate that comes in is qualified against these inputs or these critical to quality parameters. When that happened for a year and a half, in the times post that, the early attrition came down from 61% to 17%. So that's how gathering data, deriving meaningful patterns out of it, enabled us to get to a few decision points, and executing those decisions, those insights, got us this outcome. Moving on. While all of that is being done at a lot of organizations, it's fair to say that the state of people analytics in India is still not very good, and it is impacted by a lot of challenges. About 74% of organizations are still at a very nascent stage as far as their maturity on talent analytics is concerned. 3% don't even use it. And they have their challenges. If you look at your left-hand side, there are 4 major reasons that lead to organizations not being able to mature on talent analytics. 1, the data is spread out. It's at multiple sources. Today, if I was to build a social profile for any of us, we'd have to scrap data from everywhere, because there's a bit of it on Facebook, there's a bit of it on Twitter, there's a bit of it on LinkedIn, there's a bit of it on GitHub. It's all over the place, and there are very few technologies that have the ability to gather data and bring it at one place where it could be deconstructed and could be used to put to some meaning. The second challenge is lack of automated or repeatable processes. You do not have enough occurrences or recurrences around the same data set for us to be able to predict any trends. And last, the quality of that data in whatever shape and form it's available itself is poor. A lot of times it's not accurate, a lot of times it's not in the right shape, and that presents a big challenge for a data analytics guy in India to be able to make sense of that data. So while those remain as challenges, at PeopleStrong, we certainly remain hopeful that as India gets connected on the web, internet reaches to larger set of population, in the next 4 to 5 years, we would certainly see more public data coming on the web in better shape and form, and talent or people analytics would become much more easier. As far as the interest areas in talent analytics are concerned, people are trying to move from reports and dashboards to predictive analytics. That's one big trend that we've seen. Gone are the days of downloading reports and trying to make some sense out of it. Customers are demanding self-service reporting where they do not have to break their heads with that data and make sense out of it. Outside-in view has also become extremely important. So besides their own, organizations are demanding for industry benchmarks, which is insight besides what's happening inside the organization. Now let's pick up for the next section of this webinar the biggest challenge, which is the integration of data from disparate sources and predictive analytics as two areas of focus. And let's look at, in our next case study, how we've been able to gather that data from multiple sources at one place and use predictive analytics to do some exciting work for our customers as far as hiring quality talent is concerned. So how do you start building predictive analytics? These are the 5 questions that you need to ask for any problem. You start with asking yourself what happened. The immediate second question is, why did it happen? The most important question is, what will happen? And of course, followed by what should we do or what more can we do? Let's look at an example in context of recruitment. We all try and measure the offer drop rates in our talent acquisition practice. That's a problem that scares almost all talent acquisition professionals or leaders. We even go to the extent of saying, why has the offer drop rate increased? And we gather data around that. Sometimes we try and take it to analytics. But that's where we remain. One is an HR analytics metric. Second is a talent analytics metric. But organizations or teams who ask themselves which candidates are most likely to drop if we do not engage them and try and build answers to this question, really take their analytics to a people analytics level. And once you do that, it's easy to find answer to the next 2 questions. Which candidates should we target to engage? And what can we do proactively to keep candidates engaged? Answers are always the easier part in life. It's the questions which are the ones that need to get cracked. And hence I said, the most important is that question, which is what will happen, because that is what brings predictability. That is what helps you predict. So we often limit ourselves to descriptive and diagnostic stages of analytics. We rarely reach the predictive stage. And because we are not able to predict, we are not able to prescribe or we are not able to preempt. So friends, I will urge all of us to not limit our people analysis to a stage of diagnostic. It's good to know what happened. It's good to know why it happened. But unless we find the answer to what will happen, we will limit ourselves to hindsight. We must move to insight, and from there the foresight will naturally be visible, which will enable us to take decisions and actions. So these are the 5 steps in people analytics: describe, diagnose, predict, prescribe, and preempt. Now, while that's the framework, are there tools that can be used to find answers to some of those questions? So let's look at what is it that organizations or teams currently use for talent or people analytics. A whopping 79% of them use Excel-based reporting, which is, again, good for gathering the what, is good for gathering the why, but won't really tell you what will happen. That's not the tool that you could use to get to what will happen. A lot of BI tools, which also have almost a 42% usage across organizations, are good at telling you what happened or why did it happen. But I'm not sure if all of them could really get you to prediction. For sure, description and diagnosis, but not prediction all the time. Dashboarding solutions are very, very popular word. We need to move from reports and data dumps to dashboards. But dashboards invariably, once again, limit you to description and diagnosis. There are a few statistical tools that are used. Those are the ones which we must focus on to get to the next level of people analytics, which will take us to predictive, prescriptive, and preemptive stages. Unfortunately, only about 18% of teams or organizations use those. Now, as we start adopting statistical tools, a large segment of the world is moving to a very different level. Organizations like Google and so many others are moving beyond those statistical tools and are focusing on the new age tools now, which are data mining. People are building neural network of jobs, and the much heard phrase on machine learning. So the only way we could move from descriptive and diagnostic stages of people analytics to predictive and preemptive stages of prescriptive stages is when we use systems that help us mine data. As far as job is concerned, we must look at how our jobs are structured, deconstruct them, and build a neural network. I'd come to the subject of neural network of jobs in a bit for your understanding, but that's one tool which is the tool for future. And of course, concepts of machine learning, which could be correlation patterns, which could be deep learning. All these methodologies are being used to train the system to predict and preempt, because the data mining, the scale of data is so large that for us to sit and process and make sense out of that data would become practically impossible all the time. So let's look at how we've used data mining, building a neural network of jobs, and blending those with machine learning to reach to a predictive and prescriptive stage of talent analytics. So in the project that we picked up, which was around matchmaking, where we said, how do we ensure that out of a pool of 1,000 candidates, we are able to find that one person who is the best fit for that job? And that's where we figured that there are 3 stages to that problem. The first stage itself is that the ask of the job or the job description or the job profile is either not complete in itself or not accurate. And hence we started building neural networks for jobs, started breaking a job title into tasks that the individual is supposed to perform, further breaking down into skills, behaviors. Once the neural network of the job was built, we said, how do we create meaning in a candidate's profile? How do we gather data around a candidate's profile? Because most of the times, all you have access to is their CV. And that's where we went ahead and started gathering data from social, started building a social profile of every individual who was to be assessed or recruited. We brought in assessments of various kinds, videos, audios, cognitive, psychometric, and gathered some more insight about that person. Because remember, going back, this is about people analytics. And when we had both in place, we blended them together to get a match and further correlated that match with their performance on job post-hiring or their growth in the job role or their stability at the organization. So since most of us here are from HR domain, let's look at an example of how all of this was done. Let's pick up the job role of an HR business partner. I'd like you to focus on this diagram on the right, which looks somewhat like a bundle of nerves. Now, an HR BP's role or job title could be broken down into various tasks that the HR BP is expected to perform. If you look here, some of the activities that an HR BP needs to perform are compliance management, building talent acquisition strategies, compensation planning, performance management, employee engagement, HR transformation, business networking, HR budgeting, so on and so forth. I'm not going to read out all of those, but broadly that's the role of an HR business partner. These are the tasks that an HR business partner is expected to perform. When you further break each of those tasks into work types or skills, you ask yourself the second level of, or you reveal yourself the second level of hidden input here. So if somebody was to do compensation planning as a task, they would need to know compensation benchmarking. They would need to have an understanding of compensation tools. They would need to know compensation modeling as a subject. They would need to have an analytical bent of mind. They would also need to have the ability to manage equalizations as a skill set. When we break each of those tasks into these skills or work types, and then further segregate them into 5 buckets. Now, I'd like you to think for a minute as to what are the kind of work types that human beings are capable of performing. So as humans, we do 5 different kinds of work. We are capable of doing physical kind of work, or we are capable of doing conversational work. Third, we do cognitive work, which is logical thinking, problem solving, decision making, all of that. Fourth, we do design-oriented work. The job of a painter involves a lot of design-related work. The job of a poet involves a lot of design-related work. And last, as human beings, we also perform emotional and sensory work. When you are in a one-on-one with one of your direct reports or your team members, other than doing conversational and cognitive work, you're also doing emotional and sensory work. You're constantly trying to gauge the feelings and sensitivities of that direct report. So at any point in time, no matter what we do as human beings, we are doing these 5 kind of work. Given that an HRBP's role is not very physical intensive, we've replaced physical with technical here. And when you break that job title down into tasks and each task into these work types, you figure out that an HRBP's work or job is only about 35% technical. 20% of it is cognitive and conversational. About 15% of it also requires the individual to have the ability to design things, innovate. And about 12% of their job is about having emotional and sensory abilities and perform emotional or sensory kind of work. That's called building a neural network for each job, where we break the job title into tasks into work types to define what actually is the expectation when I hire an HRBP. Once you do that, a lot of it from here on is pretty simple. If I'm seeking collaboration as a work type or as a skill in an HRBP, and I'm wanting to hire one such person, I need to gather data, which is really the second step of building a candidate profile, from multiple channels to indicate to me whether the person has collaboration as a skill set with them or not. And that's where I shared that a candidate profile, if I was to go back, gets built not only from their CV, but also by gathering their social data, also by gathering inputs from the assessments that the candidates take or the inputs that come through the interactions with them. Once you have all of that at one place is when you're able to make sense of it and say whether the person has collaboration or not. Let's look at an example. Negotiating SLAs as a task requires the HRBP to have collaboration as a skill set or perform collaboration as a work type. Now, when the system looks for information within the candidate's CV, he or she may not find anything to suggest whether the person is good with collaboration or not. But when you also blend their social data with their resume, and if the person has made Facebook posts to suggest that they have been organizing events somewhere in their personal life. Technology reads that as an input to say that the ability to organize events is correlated to the ability or having the skill to collaborate. And hence the probability of this person being good with collaboration is higher vis-a-vis somebody who's not. That's how gathering candidate profile data from multiple channels and enriching candidates' profile, blending it with the expectations of the job which come out as a result of building neural network, give us a match. So your input layer is really the job title. I want to hire an HR business partner. The first hidden layer is what is this HR partner going to do? That's the tasks that is expected out of this HR business partner. The second hidden layer is to be able to do those tasks. What's the kind of work this HR business partner will have to do? And then there's an output layer, which is the candidate. Building their profiles from data mining from multiple sources and blending it with these two layers gives us an indication of how good or bad that hiree is going to be. So you've deconstructed the job through a neural network. You've gathered candidate profile through data mining. And then you've used machine learning to correlate this outcome or correlate their profiles with the outcome. So the machine gets their performance data, gets their growth data, and starts suggesting that a certain kind of candidates who are hired with a certain score and above perform better at jobs. So the machine becomes intelligent. Next time you hire for a similar role, it already knows what's the kind of person who's able to perform better, grow faster, and uses that outcome to further correlate and improve that fitment score. That's how data mining, neural networks, and machine learning blend together to predict the right hire for a job and thereby improve the quality of hire. I'd move away from the presentation for a minute and quickly, in about 2 minutes, like to share a quick demo of how machine is able to do that. We'll do a simple activity of gathering data of potential candidates for a job and then blending the asks of the job to the person's profile to suggest how good or bad a fit is the candidate for the job. Let's look at this role of a Java developer, where what I'll do is gather profiles from everywhere. I've now got the profile of a person from job board. I will also try and find their social profile or their social data. We'd even try and look if there's any data that's available for an individual within our system. And whenever I tag this candidate to the job, data from all three channels would be aggregated together to form a comprehensive profile. And as soon as a candidate is tagged to the job, basis the expectations of the job and the candidate details, which is a blend of their CV, their social data, any other score from assessments or any other source of information. When it is blended and compared to the expectations of the job, you get how good or bad is this match or this individual for this particular role. So while a lot of it sounds complex, machine algorithms make it really simple for the user. But as recruiters, as talent acquisition professionals, if we understand that we, to get the right quality of hire, need to focus not only on the candidate, but first on the job and deconstruct it using neural network as a framework. Gather data from multiple channels around a candidate's profile and blend it together to arrive at a fitment score, and further correlate that to their post-hire indicators or variables to make this process holistic and complete, is when we arrive at the best fit or the right quality of hire for the jobs that we are planning to fill. I close the session with that and would be happy to take any questions from all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. It was a really nice session, very informative and very detailed. Thank you very much. So before we start getting the questions from the rest of the participants, I have a couple of questions for you. One is that how does the HR department fine-tune the hiring policies in order to use the analytics for hiring? So what are the broad things that an HR department is supposed to do?
To my mind, only one, Arthur. Because if we move away from making the hiring process complex by having multiple policy constraints, it takes away the ease of gathering data and being able to build analytics around that. I'm not a big fan of 3 and 4 rounds of interviews, but that's an HR policy at an organization that defines and makes it mandatory for a talent acquisition function to live with it. The smarter talent acquisition teams today rely a lot on data analytics and 1 round of interaction to get to a decision making, rather than make it complex with 4 individuals wanting to arrive at a decision. I do not recall whether at workplace or in our personal lives, a lot of instances where a decision was left open to 4 people and they could easily converge on an outcome.
Okay.
So if organizations could make policies which could make the recruitment processes more objective, more data-driven and less people-driven, the chances of being able to derive data analytics and improve quality of hire go up several notches.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Singh, I also want to bring to this discussion a different angle, and that is the public sector. So we've already seen that the public sector is slowly catching up as far as an implementation and adoption of analytics is concerned. So we have a very specific question from a public sector organization, and that says that the hiring process of banks, so basically that happens with the Institute of Banking Personnel, IBPS, so which is of course an independent body that conducts the recruitment for all the PSU banks. And as such, the organization does not have any role to play in the selection. So given this constraint, and also you will appreciate the fact that attrition in public sector organizations are definitely lower than the private sector organizations. So given this background and constraint, is there any scope of using analytics for hiring? What are your views on this?
That's a very interesting and a superb question, Arko. The obvious answer to that is 100% yes. In fact, there's not only scope, there are banks who are using that now. I know of a banking organization that hires close to 14,000 people every year for their field sales force. These are guys who sell current accounts and savings accounts. And they do that without a single round of interview by the bank or the hiring managers. The entire hiring is run on matching the applicants or the candidates to a positive profile that has been built for that role. So nobody is needed to conduct an interview. Data and insights have helped them create what's the right positive profile for this kind of a job. They gather data about a candidate, blend it to that positive profile and say whether the person's a right hire or not a right hire. And they make their hiring decisions basis that. I think generally the world is moving away from the traditional approach to jobs, which was around looking at the job title, the kind of experience that the person has, the kind of education that the person has, the education institute that the person has studied from, the kind of organization that the person has previously worked in. I think we are moving away from all of that. Let me share an example with you. Look at what Uber is doing. When you are a driver, your education, your experience, your salary, none of that is linked to how well you can drive. And the job of a driver needs to be solely evaluated on their ability to drive well. That's the work that the individual does. So organizations are increasingly moving away from the concept of job to the concept of work, which is where we are seeing a lot of gig workforce growing. Today, people do not want to hire a full-time employee for a UX or UI designer. They want to have a freelancer who's good at that work, who's good at understanding what user experience interfaces are.
Right.
They're not bothered about his or her education, qualification, or years of experience, as long as that freelancer can do a very good job of designing the right kind of user experience for their products. So people are moving away from jobs to work. They're evaluating the ability of an individual to do a certain kind of work. And if that's the evaluation that needs to happen, you do not necessarily need a lot of people interviewing. You could gather a lot of data around that individual to suggest whether he or she is good at that work or not. And that's happening. That's happening with banks. That's happening with a lot of other sectors as well. So they definitely can use a lot of data and analytics to not only understand trends, but also take decisions, even in a public sector space.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. So the questions are have started to trickle in now. So we have a couple of questions from Arjun Sharma and Viju, and that's on the case study that you shared on slide number 5. And the specific questions are, do regression on 1,000 parameters, you will get correlations. How did you establish or validate the causal relationships, especially for things like hobby? Similar question from Viju also, is favorite hobby and vehicle owned is linked with previous performance to drive out the conclusions for the good performance?
So thanks for the question, Arjun and Viju. Like I said, the 8 parameters which came out as strongly correlated did not have mild correlations. we figured out that everybody, almost everybody who had an outward hobby was doing well. And almost everybody who had an inward hobby was struggling to make a sale. And because the data was so extreme that we believed it to have a strong correlation with their outcome on sales performance. Now, having said that, that was not the only metric. We looked at all of those 8 parameters together. So we did have cases where the person had an outward hobby, however, was in an age group of 30 to 35, and the performance was still not there. So we had to blend all of those 8 variables and their correlation scores to also define the correlation between each of those variables, and not just each of those variables independently with the performance and the stability scores.
Right.
And it was only after correlating the variables amongst themselves that we arrived at these 8, and hence built the hypothesis of using them as critical to quality parameters.
Okay. Okay. The next question we have is from Ms. Neha Sunar, and it's a very practical question, and it says that how do you propose to move from dashboarding and spreadsheets to analytics? So she wants to understand the how part of it.
Love the question. Thank you, Neha.
Yes, I'll repeat this. How do you propose to move from dashboarding and spreadsheets to analytics?
Sure. Thank you, Arko. Got the question. I just said that I love the question.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Dashboard and data is really the first step. There's absolutely no denying that it's important. But I think the way of moving or taking this dashboard and data towards analysis, which could reveal insights, is by one, believing that data is not only quantitative, data is qualitative. Let me share an example with you, and hopefully that will give you some view of how it could be done. At my previous organization, it used to be a contact center business. We used to assess productivity of telecallers, and we noticed that during one of the months, the productivity really dipped. That came out of a dashboard. We took that data and looked at, whether correlated it with other data sets. Were the number of absenteeism high in that month? Was the call load lower in that month? What time have the people come in? Have there been late logins which have impacted productivity? We looked at every possible data set that was available with us, and we kept correlating and still couldn't make a head and tail of it. When we finally tumbled upon one data set, we realized that the productivity was dropping within a specific time frame each day. That's where we stopped looking at data and we started, or I should say we stopped looking at quantitative data and we started to look for data which was more qualitative. We started figuring out what was happening in those hours, and that's when we realized that the World Cup was on, and during those hours, employees would take breaks to move out to the pantry area and spend 15-20 minutes to half an hour getting stuck with the matches. And that was impacting the productivity for the whole month. So data can only give you directions, suggestions to tell you what is it that you need to look for. But whatever has impacted that change in data may not always be numerical. It may be behavioral. It may be a stimulus from outside the bounds of work. Data leads us to those, but it's our responsibility to find those leading variables that have impacted that change. So once you have your dashboards and data sets, my advice is, first of all, have systems that give you the ability to drill those dashboards down, because averages are misleading. You need to reach to the lowest possible unit of that dashboard. And then if that lowest possible unit is indicating any consistent or meaningful patterns, like we said earlier, go and have interactions, try and find the causes behind those meaningful patterns. That's when analytics will happen. But if we leave it at trends and averages, I fear that we will always remain stuck at dashboards and data sets. I hope that answers your question, Neha.
Sure. Thank you. The next question is very interesting, and it's a very obvious question, especially in today's world. It says that how the social life, especially on Facebook and Twitter, influence the hiring decision as the people behave differently in social and in organizational environment. So what are your views on this?
My views, Arko, and once again, thank you for the question, are a little personal here. First of all, I do not believe that there is a personal me and there is a professional me. I am who I am as an individual. I may choose to display different sets of behaviors, but at the core, I'm still the same person.
Right. So does it matter? So if you're recruiting, does it matter?
Sorry. Yes, it does, because a lot of what I am could be understood through subtle data points. And that's where the likes that I make on Facebook, the people that I follow on Facebook, the ideology that I tweet on Twitter, are all indications of who I am at the core of me.
Right.
And organizations are using all of that data to predict whether you're the right fit culturally, whether you're the right fit into the value system, whether you have the right behaviors to be able to adapt to the asks of that organization. It may not all be technical, but all of these are indications. And when we did a survey with customer organizations, we figured that 60% of them said we are more interested in softer skills, behavioral fitment of a candidate, not so much, not only technical. You would have heard the news. Facebook used all of that data to rate US elections. So they're obviously able to use that to predict what's the kind of person you are at the core.
Right. Okay. So the next question is from Ms. Vijay Lakshmi, and her question is, which is more important? Is it people analytics or HR analytics? As you told, HR analytics is a subset of people analytics. Can we give less or more weightage to HR analytics with respect to people analytics?
I am not a big fan of HR analytics at all. Like I shared, for me, HR analytics is not even analytics. It's just a set of numbers. If human resource is at the end of the day a human, it would need to get analyzed holistically and not just in parts. An assessment of me as a human asset cannot be made only basis my scorecards, my incentive payouts, my annual performance ratings. I think I am much more than a human being than what my scorecards reflect of me. And hence, the value that I could create for an organization could be understood only if you analyze me as a person, not as somebody who is responsible for making a sale or taking a call, and how well can I speak on that call, or how well can I run a marketing campaign, or how well can I design a product. Those are only a part of me. There's much more to me as a human, and if you could get to the depths of that, your ability to bring the best out of me or get the best out of me goes up many folds. So it's always people analytics to me. It's never HR analytics. HR analytics will always be a subset of people analytics. It's good to have those numbers, and with due credit to the person who's asked the question, I 100% understand it. Not a lot of organizations have a view to those numbers as well. But I think we should continue to strive to move from HR analytics to talent analytics to people analytics.
Okay. The next question is from Mr. Rajashekhar, and this is regarding the case study that you mentioned, the project that you picked up wherein the attrition was 61% and then you brought it back to 17%. So he wants to know how to make study in multiple domains like production, maintenance, and at different hierarchical levels and grades.
I think the core of it remains the same, Raja. And again, thank you for the question. I think irrespective of what domain or what business we are in, at the end of the day, like I said, each job requires us to do certain kind of work. And if we could start breaking down each work or each job type into tasks and define what is the actual work that you're expecting the individual to do, and to be able to do that work, what's the kind of behaviors, skills, mindset, cultural alignments, value systems that the individual requires. And if you could gather enough data about them from their performance scores, from their learning scores, from their social profiles, from their personal lives, from your day-to-day interactions with them, if you could gather enough data about them and blend the two together, you will always get an indication which will suggest what will this person be best at.
Right.
And you could use those insights to get more meaningful roles for people who are already inside the organization. You could use those insights to hire the right set of people for the right jobs who are coming from outside the organization. You could even use those insights to suggest that while one may be in a certain job today, what are the areas that the person would need to learn to be able to become relevant for a couple of other roles as well in the organization. And if you could do that, you would open a world of opportunities for employees. You'd be able to leverage them for different roles within the organization. I'm a firm believer of the fact that people are not motivated only by vertical growth. Horizontal growth, richer roles, empowered roles are also a big motivator for employees. But for us to be able to get them there, we must constantly evaluate and tell them what is it that they need to work on themselves to be ready for such roles. And that'll all come when you're able to move away from this notion of job, align yourself to the notion of work, and whatever is required to do that kind of work, find that in that person by engaging better, by gathering more data about them.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll take two more questions, and the next question that I have is from Mr. Subramaniam. His question is, in a data privacy centric world, do you foresee an ethical issue in accessing data from the variety of sources? So that's the question.
I do, unfortunately. And thank you, Subbu. That's a very important subject. I, for one, believe that people would get more comfortable with putting up data in public domains, which could be accessed by others. So that's something that will happen. However, there's a lot of responsibility on organizations who access that data and make meaning out of it to ensure that they use it for constructive purposes. Because the world is moving in a very intriguing direction. It's become a world which is more open than what it was before. And if this information is put to use in the right manner, in constructive manners, I don't think people will shy away from putting up their data in open domains or would have concerns around privacy of data. But if the users of this data misuse it, I fear we may have a lot of people who would not be comfortable having their data out in the open. So I do see privacy concerns. I do see organizations who try to use data to manipulate and use it to their benefit, as long as it is done within the confines of righteousness and justness. I see this will continue to be a big trend, but if this is misused, I see these privacy concerns growing larger than ever.
Right. Okay. The final question that we have is from Ms. Priya. And her question basically talks about the quality of hire, which of course is one of the most important matrices of recruitment. So her question is, how is people analytics linked to the quality of hire? And please use the example of the bank hiring without an interview, the example that you gave for this field staff. That is her question.
Sure. So Priya, thank you for the question. People analytics, once again, to just reiterate it, is analyzing an individual, a person, and suggest what are they made up of, what are they suited for. And hence, I personally have not been able to find a better solution to derive quality of hire than people analytics. Because in the process that we did for this banking customer, we looked at their job roles and broke it down again at the expense of reiteration into tasks and work that the individuals needed to perform. And then for each of these applicants, we followed the process of running a very gamified survey where on a app-based platform, these candidates sort of completed a very gamified survey, not the usual typical boring surveys with multiple responses, but we gamified it a bit. They responded about their lives in general. They responded about their work experience. They responded about their education. All of that data was used to create a very rich profile of each of these individuals, which told us who these people really are. What are their motivations in life? What are their strengths? What do they see as their weaknesses? Once we had that data, it was very easy for us to map it to the expectations of that job or the kind of work that they needed to do to suggest who are really the best guys for this job. It was only the depth of that exercise that the customer saw and agreed to remove any interviews at all. They ran this process for 6 months in parallel with interviews. Once they noticed that whatever the system suggested as the right fit was also getting selected in the interviews, 6 months later, we did away with the interview process. But to sum it up, the crux of it is in the ability of the technology or the recruiter or the person to analyze that person, that candidate, that human being as deeply as possible.
Right. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Singh. Thank you very much for this very engaging session. It was really amazing to hear your insights and understand that how HR analytics can improve the quality of hire. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, and I'd like to thank all the 60 people who participated, and thank you for all the questions. I hope we'd go back, and at least that one thing that we do is that we'd move away from looking at analytics in context of HR or talent to looking at analytics in context of people or each human or each person. that'll help a lot. That'll make it much more deeper for all of us.
Sure. Thank you very much. So we end the webinar today over here. We'll again join back next Friday for the upcoming series. Okay, 3 are left in the series. So we'll again join back at 11:30 next Friday. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Good.